The winter storm had started before sunset, but by the time the sky turned dark, it became one of the worst blizzards the small mountain town had seen in years. Snow fell so heavily that the roads disappeared beneath thick white layers. The wind roared like a wild animal, shaking windows and pushing against every door. Most people stayed inside their warm homes, sitting close to their fireplaces, hoping the night would pass soon. But one person still had to walk through the freezing night. Her name was Maria, a young nurse who had just finished a long shift at the small local clinic. She walked slowly through the storm with her head down, holding her thin coat tightly around her. She had no scarf and no gloves, only a small cloth wrapped around her hands. Every breath came out as a white cloud. Her shoes were worn out, and the cold entered through the cracks. Still, she kept walking because she had no other choice. Maria had been struggling for months. Her rent was overdue, her food supply was almost gone. She had been skipping her own meals so she could afford transportation to work. But tonight she had walked, saving the few coins she had left for the next day. The wind pushed against her. But she kept moving forward, step by slow step, praying she would reach her small rented room before the storm grew even worse. On the empty road ahead, Maria saw something that made her stop. At first she thought it was a shadow, maybe a pile of snow pushed by the wind. But when she looked closely, the shape seemed too still, too dark, too human. Her heart jumped. She hurried toward the figure, slipping twice before reaching it. When she knelt beside the person, her breath froze for a second. It was a man, large, strong-looking, dressed in a thick ranch coat. Snow covered his hat and shoulders. He was lying on his side, his face pale and his lips trembling slightly. Maria touched his cheek. His skin felt dangerously cold. She checked his breathing. It was slow but present, sir. "Can you hear me?" she asked loudly, hoping the wind would not steal her voice. The man did not respond. Maria looked around. The road was empty. No lights, no people, no car sounds, nothing but the storm. She knew calling for help would be useless. The town was too far behind her, and even if she turned back, no one would walk through this storm. She had no phone. She had sold it 2 weeks ago to pay part of her rent. She looked again at the unconscious man. He was freezing. If she left him here, he would not survive the night. Maria made a quick decision. There was an old tool shed near the road a place villagers sometimes used to store supplies or rest for a moment during long walks. The shed was small, but roofed. It offered shelter from the wind. She slid her arms under the man's shoulders and tried to lift him. He was heavy, much heavier than she expected. Her tired body shook as she pushed and pulled, but she refused to give up. She dragged him inch by inch through the snow, her breath burning in her chest, her legs almost giving out. The storm made every movement harder, but Maria kept whispering to herself, "Don't stop. Just a little more. He needs help." After a long struggle, she finally reached the shed. She pushed the old door open and half-dragged, half-rolled the man inside. The shed was dark, cold, and smelled of old wood. But it was much better than being out in the open storm. Maria shut the door and leaned against it for a moment. Her arms were shaking. She was exhausted, hungry, and freezing. But she forced herself to stay focused. She knelt beside the man and checked him again. His breathing was too shallow. His skin was losing color. Maria knew he needed warmth. Immediately, she took off her own coat thin and barely warm and placed it over him. She rubbed his arms, trying to create heat. Then she took the small metal box she carried in her bag. Inside was the last food she had, a small loaf of bread and a nearly empty thermos with warm tea. She opened the thermos. The tea was lukewarm, but it would help. She lifted his head gently and brought the thermos to his lips. "Come on. Try to drink a little," she whispered. A small drop touched his lips. He swallowed weakly. Maria sighed with relief. She gave him a few more sips, then put the thermos aside. For a moment, she just sat there, watching him. She had no idea who he was. His clothes were good quality, his boots expensive, his coat thick and well-made. He looked like someone who lived a comfortable life, nothing like her. But none of that mattered right now. He was simply a human life in danger. "Don't worry," she whispered softly. "I will stay with you." The shed grew colder as the night deepened. The wind howled outside, pushing against the walls. Snow piled up at the door. Maria stayed awake, rubbing his arms whenever his breathing slowed. She pulled him closer to herself so her body heat could reach him. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she ignored it. Hours passed slowly. At one point she felt him shiver. She gently touched his forehead. It was burning hot, a fever. She whispered, "Oh no." A fever combined with freezing weather was dangerous. She needed to keep him warm. She removed her thin sweater, leaving only her worn shirt, and placed the sweater over him too. She hugged him again, trying to warm him with her body heat. Her own teeth chattered, but she did not stop. "Hold on. Just hold on," she murmured to the unconscious man. The storm outside grew louder. The shed door rattled, but Maria did not move away. The man's breathing stayed slow but steady. She kept checking it every few minutes, making sure he was still with her. As the night dragged on, Maria wondered who he might be. A traveler? A ranch worker? Someone returning home? She tried to imagine his story. He looked strong, the kind of man who worked outdoors often. Maybe he was used to storms like this, but something must have gone wrong. Maybe he had been riding and fell. Maybe his horse ran off. Maybe he had gotten lost on the way back to his home. Maria sighed. She wanted to help him more, but she had nothing left. No food, no blankets, no strong coat, no proper shelter. Still, she stayed. Hours later, maybe close to dawn, the man moved slightly. Maria lifted her head quickly. His fingers twitched. His lips parted. She leaned closer. "Can you hear me? You're safe. Do you hear me?" The man tried to open his eyes, but they fluttered weakly before closing again. She touched his cheek. It felt warmer than before. Not warm enough, but better. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. She did not know if he heard her, but saying it gave her strength. She rested her head against the wooden wall, still holding him, still keeping him warm. Her limbs were numb, but she refused to sleep. If she slept, he might stop breathing without her noticing. Finally, after what felt like hours of silence, the man moved again. His breathing grew a little stronger. His head shifted slightly on her lap. Then, for the first time since she found him, he opened his eyes. They were tired, eyes deep, warm, and confused. He blinked several times, trying to understand where he was. His gaze traveled slowly, taking in the dark shed, the weak light coming from a crack in the wall, and finally, the young woman who was holding him. Maria straightened up quickly. "You're awake," she said, her voice soft but relieved. The man stared at her for a moment, trying to form words. "WHA? Where?" he murmured weakly. "You collapsed in the snow," Maria explained. "I brought you here so you wouldn't freeze." His eyes moved slowly over her thin clothes, the coat and sweater covering him, the worry on her face. He noticed her trembling hands and pale cheeks. "You saved me," he whispered. Maria looked away shyly. "I just did what anyone would do." The man seemed to want to say more, but he was too weak. His eyes closed again, but this time he stayed conscious. Maria checked his temperature. Still high, but not as dangerous as before. "You need real help," she said. "But the storm is too strong." "We will wait until morning," the man nodded faintly. His breathing steadied. Maria sat beside him again, holding his hand gently. She knew morning was still hours away, but she felt a small spark of hope. He had survived the worst part of the night. Outside, the storm slowly began to calm inside the shed. A young nurse who had nothing left had saved a man who had everything. Neither of them knew how much this single night would change their lives, and neither of them knew that this man, weak, cold, and barely conscious, was James Carter, one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the region for now. He was simply a man alive because a starving nurse refused to leave him alone in the snow. The morning light slowly pushed its way into the small shed through a thin crack in the wooden wall. The storm had finally calmed, though the snow outside still lay thick and heavy on the ground. The wind no longer roared. Instead, It whispered quietly around the shed. As if tired from the long night, Maria opened her eyes for a moment, feeling the cold that had seeped into her bones. She had stayed awake most of the night, checking the breathing of the man who lay beside her. Now that the danger had passed, her eyelids grew heavy, but just as she was about to drift into sleep, she felt movement. The man shifted slightly, trying to sit up. Maria straightened quickly. "Careful," she said softly. "Your body is still weak." The man leaned back against the wall, breathing slowly. His eyes, though tired, were clearer than they had been in the night. He studied the young woman who had spent the whole night protecting him. Noticing how tired she looked, her clothes thin, her hands trembling from the cold, her face pale. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I owe you my life." Maria shook her head. "No. Anyone would have helped." The man smiled slightly. "No, not in a storm like last night." Tried to stand up, but his legs gave out almost immediately. Maria caught his arm and supported him. "You shouldn't move yet," she said. "Your fever hasn't fully gone." He looked at her with curiosity. "You're a nurse?" She nodded. "Yes, at the town clinic." He glanced around the shed again, confusion slowly turning into understanding. "You carried me here?" "I dragged you," she said honestly. "You were too heavy to carry." He breathed out and shook his head in disbelief. "I can't imagine how you did it." Maria avoided his eyes. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "I just didn't want you to freeze." Silence filled the shed for a moment. Snowflakes drifted past the small window. The man finally looked at her again and said, "My name is James. James Carter." The name meant nothing to her. She had never gone beyond the town clinic in her tiny room. She didn't know the names of wealthy landowners or powerful ranch families, so she simply replied, "I'm Maria." James nodded slowly. "Maria, that's a good name." For a moment his gaze softened, but then he winced and placed a hand on his forehead. "My head feels heavy, yet a strong fever," she said. "You still need warmth and rest." He closed his eyes a moment, then opened them again with effort. "Maria, I need to get back to my ranch." "My men must be worrying." Maria hesitated. She knew he wasn't ready to walk such a distance. His body was weak, and the snow outside was still deep. But he seemed determined. "You can't go now," she said gently. "If you try walking, your fever might return. You need proper medical help, but it's too far to walk in your condition." James looked down, realizing she was right. "Then what do we do?" "We wait," Maria said, "until the sun rises higher and the path becomes clear. Maybe someone will pass by, or we can try to walk slowly with you leaning on me." James's brow tightened slightly. He didn't like the thought of her supporting him. She looked too thin, too weak. "It didn't feel right. You shouldn't carry my weight," he said. "You already saved me." "I can't ask you to do more," Maria sighed. "You're not asking. I'm choosing. You're still sick." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded in quiet acceptance. The sunlight became brighter as the morning grew. Maria opened the shed door slowly. A wave of cold air rushed in, but the storm had left the sky clear. The white world outside sparkled under the sun. "It looks safe to walk," she said. James tried to stand again, this time holding onto the wall. He managed to stay up for a few seconds, but when he tried to take a step, his legs wobbled. Maria immediately slipped under his arm and held him up. "You can lean on me," she said. James hesitated again. "I'm too heavy." "It's fine," she insisted. Slowly, they stepped out into the snow. The ranch was west of town, and from the shed Maria guessed they were not very far. But walking through deep snow was difficult. James struggled, and Maria could feel his weight pressing on her, but she did not complain. She walked carefully, step by step, keeping her focus on keeping him upright. After nearly an hour of slow walking, James pointed weakly toward a distant hill. "My ranch is behind that ridge," he said. "We're close." Maria nodded and encouraged him gently. "Just a little more." As they reached the hilltop, Maria saw a large ranch house in the distance, surrounded by a wooden fence and several barns. Smoke rose from a chimney. It looked warm, safe, and comfortable, nothing like her small rented room suddenly. From the ranch gate, a man on horseback galloped toward them. When he came closer, his eyes widened. "Boss?" the rider shouted. "Mr. Carter, is that you?" James nodded weakly. The rider jumped off the horse and hurried to them. "We've been looking for you since last night. What happened?" James pointed toward Maria. "She saved me. I collapsed in the snow. She kept me alive." The rider's eyes moved to Maria, filled with surprise. He nodded gratefully. "Thank you, miss." Maria shook her head quickly. "Please don't thank me. I only did what I had to." But James spoke firmly. "You saved my life. That's something no one forgets." The rider helped James onto the horse. Maria took a step back, unsure what to do next. She had done her part. Now she needed to go home. But before she could speak, James turned to her. "You're coming with me," he said in a quiet but steady voice. Maria shook her head. "No, I can walk home." "Maria," he said, "you just spent the night freezing because of me. You haven't eaten. You're shaking. You need warmth and food." She swallowed hard. She didn't want to trouble anyone. "I'm fine, really." James stared at her for a moment, then said to the rider, "Help her onto the horse." Maria tried to protest, but the rider gently held out his hand. She finally accepted it and climbed behind James. The horse moved toward the ranch, its hooves cutting through the snow. At the ranch, several workers ran out when they saw James arrive. They shouted in relief, some almost speechless at the sight of their boss being supported by a thin young woman. James was helped inside, wrapped in blankets, and given warm broth. Maria stood awkwardly near the door, unsure where to go or what to do. James noticed her discomfort and called out to his housekeeper. "Mrs. Turner, please take care of Maria," he said. "Give her warm clothes, food, and a place to rest." Mrs. Turner, a kind woman in her 50s, nodded with a warm smile. "Come with me, dear." Maria followed her down the hallway to a small guest room. Mrs. Turner looked her over and shook her head softly. "Child." He looked frozen. "Sit. Sit." Maria sat slowly. Feeling shy and overwhelmed, Mrs. Turner brought her a warm blanket, a fresh set of clothes, and a bowl of hot soup. "Thank you," Maria whispered. "You're welcome, dear," Mrs. Turner said. "Mr. Carter is a good man. You helped him in a way none of us could have. You must stay until you're fully warm." Maria nodded, though she still felt she didn't belong in such a beautiful house. Later that afternoon, after resting and eating, Maria stood outside James's room. She wanted to check on him before leaving. She knocked softly. "Come in," his voice called. She entered and found him sitting up with a blanket around his shoulders. He looked much better, though still pale. "You should be resting more," she said. He smiled gently. "I will, but I wanted to see you." Maria lowered her eyes. She wasn't used to someone speaking to her with such warmth. "I'm glad you're okay," she said quietly. James studied her carefully. "Maria, may I ask you something?" She nodded. Double quotes, "Why do you look so tired? You gave me your coat, your sweater. You hardly had anything yourself." Maria hesitated. She didn't want to tell him about her struggles. She didn't want pity. "I'm fine," she said, trying to smile. But James shook his head. "No, you're not. You're thinner than anyone should be. And your hands were shaking even before you helped me walk." Maria swallowed. "It's just, things have been difficult, but I'm managing." James watched her, his expression softening. "How many meals have you skipped lately?" Her silence was the answer. James exhaled slowly. Something inside him tightened, something like frustration, but also concern. This young woman had nearly starved herself, yet she spent her last strength keeping him alive. "Maria," he said in a quiet but firm voice, "you cannot go back home like this." She looked up, startled. "I have to. I work tomorrow." "You can work," he said, "but you will stay here for now, at least until you regain your strength." Maria shook her head. "I can't stay here. I don't belong in a place like this." James's eyes softened. "You saved my life. You belong wherever you choose to." And right now, you need warmth more than anything." She looked down, unsure how to respond. His voice was gentle, but there was a firmness beneath it. "You're not a burden," he added. "You helped me when you could have walked away. Let me return the kindness." Maria felt something stir inside her, a feeling she had not felt in months. Safety, care, respect. But she still whispered, "I don't want you to feel responsible for me." James shook his head. "I don't feel responsible. I feel grateful." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something new, warm, and fragile. As the evening lights filled the ranch house, Maria sat quietly in the guest room, staring at the snow outside. She knew her life had changed in a single night. She had saved a stranger in the storm, and now that stranger was showing her more kindness than anyone had in years. She didn't know why he cared so much. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope, and she didn't know it yet, but yeah. The night passed quietly over Carter Ranch. The storm had ended completely, leaving behind a calm white world. Snow covered the fields like a soft blanket. The sunrise spread a golden glow across the fences, barns, and mountains in the distance. It was peaceful, so peaceful it felt like a different world from the one Maria had fought through just a day before. Maria woke early. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, with her hands clasped together, thinking. The room was warm, more comfortable than any place she had slept in for months. The soft blanket, the wooden furniture, smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchenette, all felt unreal. But as much as she appreciated everything, she also felt out of place. This was not her world. She was a simple nurse with debts, sleepless nights, and an empty wallet. James Carter was wealthy, respected, and surrounded by people who cared for him. She did not belong in a house like this. She sighed and stood up. Deciding she should leave before things became complicated, she found her old clothes, neatly folded on a chair. Mrs. Turner had washed them at dawn. Maria changed into them, even though the warm dress the housekeeper gave her felt far more comfortable. She folded the borrowed clothes carefully and placed them on the bed. When she stepped outside the guest room, the ranch felt quiet. Workers had already gone to start their morning tasks. The house was calm, except for the faint crackling sound of a fire somewhere in the living room. Maria walked slowly down the hallway. She peeked in James's room. He was asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. She hesitated, wanting to leave a note, but she had nothing to write with. And even if she did, what would she write? "Thank you, but I do not belong here. Sorry for the trouble." Her heart felt heavy. She turned and walked softly toward the front door. Mrs. Turner saw her from the kitchen and hurried over. "Leaving already, dear? Without breakfast?" Maria smiled faintly. "Thank you, but I need to go. I don't want to cause trouble." Mrs. Turner frowned gently. "You're not causing trouble. Mr. Carter wants you to rest. At least have some food before leaving." Maria shook her head. "I'll be fine. Please thank him for everything." Before the housekeeper could stop her, Maria slipped out the door. The morning was cold, but gentle compared to the storm before. Maria walked down the ranch steps and onto the snow-covered path. Her heart pounded strangely. She did not understand why leaving felt so difficult. She had only known James for a short time, yet his voice, his eyes, his gratitude, all of it stayed in her mind. "This is the right thing," she whispered to herself. "I don't belong in his world." She kept walking, but she didn't get far. Behind her, she heard a door open sharply, followed by hurried steps on the wooden porch. "Maria." She froze. The sound of his voice made her chest tighten. She turned slowly and saw James, wrapped in a blanket around his shoulders, leaning against the porch rail for support. His hair was messy, his expression full of worry. "You're leaving?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. Maria lowered her eyes. "You need rest." "I don't want to disturb anything here." "You're not disturbing anything," he said, taking a step forward. His legs were still weak. He almost stumbled, but he held on to the railing and continued. "Why are you leaving without saying goodbye?" Maria swallowed and looked away. "Because I don't belong here. James stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand her reasoning. Then he slowly walked down the steps, each movement careful and painful. "Maria," said again, his voice quiet but strong. "Who told you that?" She looked up finally. "I don't need anyone to tell me. It's obvious. This place? It's beautiful, warm, safe. You're a man everyone respects. I'm barely surviving. I don't want your workers to think I came here for something I don't deserve." James reached her and stood in front of her, breathing heavily but steady. His eyes were calm, warm, and determined. "You think saving my life is something you don't deserve to be respected for?" he asked. Maria shook her head. "Anyone could have helped you." "No," he said firmly. "They couldn't. No one else found me in that storm. No one else stayed awake all night, freezing, hungry, and exhausted. No one else risked their own health just to keep me breathing." Maria felt her eyes sting. She blinked away the emotion. "James, please," she whispered. "You're kind, but I can't stay here." "Why?" he asked softly. She hesitated. Then, in a small, trembling voice, she said, "Because people like you and people like me don't live in the same world." James looked at her for a long moment. The wind brushed snow off the fence. A horse neighed softly near the stable. The ranch was waking up. But James's world had narrowed to one thing: one woman standing in the snow, trying to walk away from him. Then he spoke. "Maria, I don't want a world without you in it." Her heart stopped. She stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. But he continued before she could speak. "You saved me," he said, "but it's not just that. You gave me something I haven't felt in years: human kindness. Real kindness. You cared about me not because of my name, my money, or my ranch. You cared because I was hurting, because I needed help." Maria looked down, her breath shaking. "You think I'm strong," James continued, "but I wasn't strong that night. I was helpless. And you didn't walk away. You didn't even hesitate." He let the blanket fall from his shoulders and stepped closer. The cold touched his skin, but he ignored it. "Maria, I want you to stay. At least for now. Not forever unless you choose it. But stay until you're healthy. Until you have strength again. You deserve warmth. You deserve rest. And you deserve to know you're not alone." Maria felt something break inside her, the hard wall she had built around her. She looked up slowly, tears shining in her eyes. "But I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "You could never be a burden," James said softly. "You gave me my life. Let me give you something small, in return safety." Maria wiped her eyes with her cold fingers. "I don't want pity." James shook his head. "This isn't pity. This is gratitude, respect, and respect. Something more." Her breath caught. "Something more?" she repeated. James nodded slowly. "When I woke up in that shed and saw you holding my hand, something changed for me. I saw someone with a heart stronger than any storm. Someone brave, gentle, and kind. Someone who didn't give up even when she had nothing left." He looked down, gathering strength, then lifted his eyes again. "I'm not asking you to stay because you've saved my life. I'm asking you to stay because I want you here." Silence fell. The world around them became quiet, as if waiting for her answer. Maria looked at him. The man she had saved was no longer just a stranger. He was someone who stood in the cold just to stop her from walking away. Someone who saw her strength when she didn't see it herself. Someone who spoke to her with sincerity, not because he felt obligated, but because he meant every word. Slowly, she exhaled. "But what will people say?" she asked softly. James smiled gently. "Let them talk. I know the truth. And you know the truth. That's all that matters." Her shoulders relaxed. She felt the fear inside her start to melt. "Will I really not be a problem?" she asked. "You," James said, stepping even closer. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." Her breath trembled again. But this time, it was not from fire. It was from something warm, something hopeful. James held out his hand slowly. "Come back inside, Maria. Please." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she placed her hand gently in his, and in that simple touch, everything changed inside the ranch house. Mrs. Turner watched them from the kitchen window. A soft smile spread across her face. She nodded as if she had expected this all along. James led Maria back inside, making sure she didn't slip on the snowy steps. He wrapped a warm scarf around her shoulders, one she hadn't noticed before. The fire crackled quietly, filling the house with warmth. Maria sat near the fireplace, while James rested on a chair nearby. He watched her with a peaceful expression, as if the whole world had finally settled into place. For the first time in many years, Maria felt she didn't have to fight alone. She felt wanted not for what she could do, but for who she was. Over the next days, she stayed at the ranch. She helped James with his recovery, and he made sure she ate proper meals. They walked around the ranch together, talked about life, dreams, and fears. Every moment they spent together made the bond between them stronger, deeper, and more meaningful. What had begun as a terrifying night in the snow had transformed into something neither of them expected, a connection built on kindness, respect, and quiet courage. Eventually, Maria understood something important. She had not saved James alone. James had saved her too, not from the storm outside, but from the storm inside her heart, and in time. The wealthy cowboy who once lay freezing in the snow made her something she never thought she would be, his everything.